Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. If you're watching, you can see I got my unicorn hat on because we're talking about the Boston Marathon today, and specifically just some fueling tips that I have as someone who has run the marathon 3 times and also helped so many other runners with their fueling plan and whatnot for this race. This could also be applied like to some of the other later start races that exist, like the New York City Marathon. Of course, not perfect application, but some of the tips that I have do like definitely overlap for those late start races, which basically just means you start like more than 3 hours after you wake up, which is the case for these two races for most people, unless you're maybe like in the elite field. Um, so let's dive right in. I will say, as someone who has run the Boston Marathon 3 times, and out of my 9 marathons, those 3 marathons were my fastest marathons. Um, and I've run it in different phases of life, motherhood and pre-motherhood, coached a lot of people through it. It's obviously like a massive achievement and goal for a lot of people. And I think one of the reasons the Boston Marathon is so like elusive, and why people have a really hard time at this race is because of the pressure, the logistics, and the fact that it is a masterclass in being a well-rounded athlete. And it really identifies weaknesses a lot of runners tend to have. Which means basically, if you're not fueling yourself properly, and you don't really have that nailed down, or if you don't do strength training, or if you really shy away from like hills or like harder terrain on running, that's really going to show up and bite you in the butt on race day. Also, if you struggle with like going out too fast, pacing, that's really going to show up and be a hard thing for you on race day. I also think the pressure really gets to people. So, a tip I have that's not necessarily nutrition related, but to have my coaching hat on, since I've coached a lot of people through this course, is try to observe the energy around you and not necessarily absorb all of the energy around you, because it's going to be a lot of type A, you like very nervous energy. And while that's really cool, I think to observe, if you're taking a lot of that on, if you're like me and you tend to be more of like an empath type of person, you can burn yourself out like before you even get to the start line, because there's just the expo and the whole city comes alive and you got to jump through a bunch of hoops just to get through the start line. And people get really anxious about these things. And it can be really overwhelming. But it's also really cool. If you're just observing it, you're like, dang, this is a cool experience. I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to control my controllables and try not to, overwork myself too much. Um, so when it comes to fueling tips, we got to start with, of course, the weekend. So if you've been around here for a while, you know that I'm a huge fan of evidence-based practices that especially also I see really go well when applied in clinical practice. Because research is great, but sometimes research is done in a lab. And well, you guys aren't lab rats, you're humans with a lot of external factors that we may or may not be able to control, like we can in a lab. So when evidence-based recs apply really well to the majority of the individuals that I see, I tend to recommend it on big old platforms like this one. So, of course, none of this is going to be individualized advice. If you do want an individualized fuel plan, make sure you get on either myself or Erica's calendar, so that we can help you, solidify this. But this I've seen go really well for the majority of people, myself included. One of those recommendations is to carb load. Okay. Carb loading is so important for marathons. And there's ways you can tweak it to make it more user friendly for yourself. There's ways I have people get their toes wet with it and then build on that experience over the course of many races. There's tweaks I make for people. Carb loading can look a lot of different ways, but generically, in general, it should be about 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates for 3 days before a marathon. So for Boston, you would start on probably Friday. A lot of people ask me, like, can I start earlier? Which I love that question. And I'm always like, sure, like, more glycogen in the tank is more glycogen in the tank. And of course, the purpose of carb loading is to top off your glycogen stores, which is that stored carbohydrate. That is really key after 90 minutes, especially like 90 minutes to 2 hours of more intense exercise like marathoning, especially if you are racing the marathon. But even if you are just like fun run, easy pace, party pacing it, it's still really helpful. It's going to help you recover a lot faster too if you're able to carb load. And again, I see so many runners just not know how to do this properly, or they tried to do it once, got overwhelmed, or had a ton of symptoms and swore it off forever. And I can tell you, every single one of those people that have come to me with those stories, I've been able to help do this a little bit more smoothly and strategically. So if you've had trouble with carb loading in the past, or it just really intimidates you, make sure you set up an appointment because we can definitely, troubleshoot that. And this is something a lot of people don't do. They don't do it. A lot of runners under fuel. It's estimated about half of runners under fuel, and that can be in the form of just everyday fueling, carb loading, not taking intra-run fuel, a combination of these things. And I see a lot of people just misguided on the carb loading front. So while Boston Marathon does tend to attract a lot of like really serious recreational athletes who are maybe on the faster side. That's not the only people that run Boston, but compared to a lot of other races, that tends to be a big majority of, the pie chart there. It's something that just because they're fast doesn't mean they know what they're doing. There's a lot of things that go into people's performance. And what I see so many fast runners who just have a ton of potential still on the table because they haven't done some of these other things to their potential yet. And carb loading is one of those things. Now, carb loading is important for marathons, period. It is so important, in my opinion, for the Boston Marathon. Why? Because we use more carbohydrates for energy. If I had a graph, I'd put it on here and show you. But basically, the more intense the exercise, the more like percentage of energy we are getting from carbohydrates, either in the form of free glucose in the bloodstream from like gels that you're taking during your run, or from glycogen. In the Boston Marathon's a really intense course, and we see people bonk hard in this race because I think hardest intensity of this course comes in the form of the Newton Hills, and it comes at a point in the race where your glycogen is probably gone already if you didn't carb load properly. And that's why I think a lot of people really, really struggle with this race. I know so many talented people who qualified for Boston by 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes, right? Like super talented athletes just get eaten alive by this course because you can't get away with not doing this stuff as easily on this course. It's just super intense. And in my opinion, I love it so much because it is kind of like a master class and doing a lot of like the little tedious things correctly, like eating enough, doing your strength training, running hills, having a good mindset, all of that stuff. So carb loading super important, especially for this race. It's just going to help you so much be able to finish feeling really good, which I've done, I'd say 2, if not 3 times. I'll say 3 times because even the last time I ran Boston, I felt like I didn't finish as well, but the last 2 miles were still my fastest miles of the whole race. So I'll call that a win. You can really finish feeling strong instead of like crawling and feeling like, why the hell did I do this? This was awful. So another thing that we want to do with carb loading is we want to start Friday. And I'm not going to get too much into the nitty gritty of like how to carb load. I have that in other episodes and a lot of other resources, blog posts on my website about how to do that. But you can do that with a lot of local stuff at Boston. If you're traveling, there's Sweetgreen, Kava, bagel places like right on Boylston Street. There's a Whole Foods, grocery stores that you can buy things. The North End has a ton of great Italian restaurants. Just make sure you're getting low-fat things for carb loading so you don't get a tummy ache. And a lot of really great options, just even like right by the expo, like finish line area. And I know you're listening to this in March, so there is still some time. The week of the Boston Marathon is not the first time we should be carb loading. You should be doing a day carb load, so like a mini carb load, before all of your long runs that are over 2 hours long. And this is going to help you practice so that come race week, nothing new on race week. You're just like, I copy and paste 3 days instead of one. And also so that you know what foods you tolerate well, you know how to do it. It's not as stressful. Just like practicing other things before race day. Also, the next tip I have is to make sure you're practicing a late start or race simulation long run at least one time. So if you know approximately what wave you think you're going to be in for the Boston Marathon, they typically start between 9 a.m. and like 11:30 a.m. This is typically late because you typically are getting up between 5 and 6, having to take a bus out of the Boston Commons if you're coming from inner city, or taking the T or a car or something, some sort of transportation to get to the start line, which is not in Boston, it's in Hopkinton, which is approximately 26.2 miles away from Boston proper. And it takes a while. The logistics on race morning are challenging, right? It takes some time. So you're probably getting up 5, 6, 7 hours before you actually start the race. And this is something that I highly recommend you practice at least once during your training. I know for a lot of people, this can be really tricky if you like typically do your long runs like before your kids get up in the morning or before work, or you're doing it with a run group at 8 a.m. or just kind of like, you're not like, I don't usually get up that many hours before I'm going to go do a long run. Yeah, you're not alone. Most of my clients are in the same boat. But if you can practice it once, it's really helpful. So practice a race simulation run. And also, like, if you can make it one of your bigger long runs or bigger workouts, like, again, this is a big goal for you. So if you can just dedicate some time towards this and practice, treat yourself, if you will, and schedule and block some time to get this done. It's one run. That can be really, really helpful because then you can practice what it's like to have to eat several times before your long run. And again, you can practice this and then copy paste for race day so that you're not panicking, fearing the unknown, like, is this going to work? And also so that you can troubleshoot if you don't quite nail it the first time. For all of my Boston marathons, again, including the one that I was like partially breastfeeding during my training for, I always made sure to practice this at least once just because, and I'm a dietitian, like I know stuff, right? But it still was helpful to be like in it and simulate it best I could, especially when I was breastfeeding because your energy needs are higher, even though I stopped before the race. So what it's probably going to look like to fuel for race day, and this is what you should probably practice in training, is your breakfast can be a bit more complex. You can have some protein and fat in there. Some people are more sensitive to that than others, and it kind of depends on the individual, but this could be your like bagel, peanut butter, honey, banana, Gatorade type of breakfast where you've got a little bit more complexity. Or it could be like your oatmeal bowl, or whatever it is that you would typically eat before a long run. And again, if you're like, well, I don't typically eat something that complex before a long run because my long run's usually at 5 a.m, then this is why we need to practice. Because if you're having like an applesauce pouch before the Boston Marathon, that's not great because you're going to have to eat a lot in the 6 hours that you're awake. The next time we probably want to eat, so again, your breakfast, the complex one, that's going to be probably like in your hotel, in your Airbnb, at your house, wherever you're waking up to start the day. That breakfast is going to be like within an hour of waking up. It's probably going to suck to get down on race day because of nerves, or you're just like, I'm so freaking sick of carbohydrates because of all this carb loading. You're doing it right if that's the case. I pretty much never finish my breakfast on race morning, but I force feed myself like a champ and try to get at least 2/3 of it down. Again, that's why the carb loading is helpful, because if you don't do it perfectly, it's like, well, my glycogen's doing pretty good. The next kind of like point in time, no matter what wave you're in, that I recommend people fuel again, is when you're on the bus. If you are taking the buses, the school buses, which don't have a bathroom, by the way, so do make sure you don't have to go to the bathroom because it's usually a 45-minute to hour-long ride. And the first time I ran this race, I didn't go to the bathroom before because I didn't have to, and I thought I was going to die by the time I got to Athletes Village. And you still probably have like a 30-minute wait before you can get into a bathroom. when you get to Athletes Village. Just keep that in mind. The next time I want you to fuel is on the bus. So if you're taking the buses, fuel on the bus. If you're not taking the buses, fuel about 2 hours before your start time. This is probably going to be mostly carbohydrates. Things I've brought on the bus with me are graham crackers, honey stinger waffles, applesauce pouches, picky bars, fig bars. I'm trying to think what else. Gummies, Pop-Tarts. These are your simple carbohydrates. You probably want around 60 grams of carbohydrates, like 40 to 70 grams would be a range, depending on the person's size. And this is going to be mostly easy to digest carbohydrates because you don't really want this contributing to like having to go to the bathroom in a big way, having to be really complicated to digest. We're just trying to keep the blood sugar up. So it should be something that you know you can get down pretty well. If you are someone who tends to do a lot of early morning runs where you can't necessarily have like a super complex breakfast, this is typically what you would have like before one of those runs. Maybe you're increasing it a little bit because you have a little bit more time to digest, but that's typically what this is. Simple carbohydrates, like 40 to 70 grams. Easy to get down, something you know you can get down even if you're nervous or not hungry. The next time I want you to fuel, again, no matter what wave you're in, is when you are either like in Athletes Village or taking the walk from Athletes Village to the start line. Now, if this is your first Boston or it's been a while, you're going to walk about a 5K before you even start this race. Even if you are trying so hard to stay off your feet, you're probably going to walk a 5K. And it's okay. Again, three marathons that were my fastest marathons. So don't freak out. But this is also why it's important to eat, because walking a 5K is not nothing, before running a marathon. There's about a mile walk from Athletes Village to the start line. They call you by wave and they kind of send you through the chute and you walk down the street, you get cheered on by people. It's great. And you're like, I'm just walking. This is where people shed a lot of their layers, fuel one last time, maybe sip some water. It's a downhill walk, which is nice. Or, stay dry if it's raining. But this is another good time to fuel. This is literally usually where I'll have people take a gel, take some chews, take an applesauce pouch, take something that's super duper easy to digest, 10 to 20 grams of carbohydrate, doesn't have to be anything huge. But again, just to kind of keep your blood sugar up. We still have a marathon to run. And hydrate too. We also want to be hydrating throughout this whole process, especially if, and this happens a lot, unfortunately, because of the weather patterns that have been changing. But it seems like we've had a lot more warm and humid Boston marathons lately. The 3 times I ran the race, we had pretty good weather. Like, I can't complain, but it was definitely on like the warmer, humid side. And the weather's going to change for every wave, and it's going to change as you get closer to Boston because Boston's on the water. The tides change. New England weather's crazy weird. I remember hitting like different towns and getting like waves of humidity. And then it would like rain, it would kind of like get more humid, and then it would kind of dry out a little bit more. There were times I got absolutely fried from sunburn, even though it didn't really feel that hot. So make sure you're staying hydrated throughout the morning too, just so that you're not arriving to the start line like dehydrated already, having to run 26.2 miles. So 3 points of fueling, no matter what wave you're in. 1 is when you wake up. That's more complex. That should be about 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, which is typically like between 60 and 120 grams of carbohydrate for most people. You can also incorporate some protein and fat, but I would keep the protein under 20 grams and I would keep the fat under 10. Keep the fiber relatively minimal. People have different sensitivity levels to that. And then the next time you're going to fuel is on the bus or on the drive or the ride, or about 2 hours before your start time, however you're getting to the start line. Highly recommend the buses if you're able to do that, just because it's streamlined and incredibly organized. This is going to be super simple carbohydrates, probably, around like 40 to 70 grams. And then the third time you're going to fuel is in the village or on the walk to the start line. And that's probably like 10 to 20, maybe 30 grams of carbohydrate, depending on what you tolerate. And this is going to be very, very simple carbohydrates like a gel or chews. Some people like to take a caffeinated gel at this point. I tend to not like that because I don't need any extra anxiety from caffeine. I prefer to take it when I'm running personally, but that can be a strategy that some people use as well. And we really want to stay hydrated, preferably with like a sports drink that has some sodium and carbohydrates in it, and obviously water, throughout the whole morning. Another tip I will give, not a nutrition tip, but this goes with the nutrition, and that is bathrooms. There are bathrooms in Boston Common where you get on the buses. Highly recommend you use them, and spread out too, because people get really bunched and then it gets like really, really congested. Last year was very congested. And if you had just gone like a couple more steps, you'd be at empty porta potties. Um, there are also bathrooms in Athletes Village, tons of them. You're still going to wait in line though. So plan to just get in and out of the bathroom line essentially. And pro tip, there's another pod, pretty big pod of bathrooms and also urinals right at the start line. So you do like the mile, I think it's like 0.7 or 0.8 mile walk down to the start line from Athletes Village. And at the bottom of the hill, you can either, there's a drugstore. You can either turn right to go up the hill to all the corrals, which is super obvious. You will see a buttload of people squished into this tiny street, because this is a marathon major, basically on small town roads. So you can go right to the corrals, or you can go left to the bathroom pods / where the drugstore is in the parking lot. So you can go to the bathroom like one more time right before the start. I've done that every single time. So if you need to go to the bathroom again, it's right there. You don't have to be like, I have to be good to go when I leave Athletes Village. You can absolutely go again. And you can always get in a later corral or a later wave if for some reason you miss yours. Not ideal, but it does happen. Try to give yourself plenty of time to do things, just because, again, lots of hoops to jump through. Erring on the earlier side tends to be better. For gear check, and this is where maybe your post-race fueling comes in. So we're skipping ahead a little bit. But for gear check, you do have to gear check your bag before you get on the buses in Boston Common. So if you are like, I'm not participating in the buses, like I'm going straight to Hopkinton, then gear check might not be a great idea for you because you would have had to leave Boston. The gear check's basically by the finish line on Boylston Street, and it's going to be in the same place when you finish the race. So you can't gear check anything in Athletes Village. So I typically tell people if you're going to have like a protein shake or a protein bar or electrolytes or something for post-race, which you should absolutely be planning for, because also the post-race fuel at Boston for the most prestigious quote unquote marathon in the world is complete trash. It's complete trash. They give you like a Gatorade Zero pouch, a water bottle, a banana, and like a Hawaiian bun. In my opinion, trash fuel. They really should upgrade. And I think last year they gave us like an Ensure protein drink. That was so gross. So if you're particular like I am about your post-race fueling, and you should be, especially if you're going to have a bit of a walk to get back to your hotel or your Airbnb post-race. I've always had like a 2-mile walk after the race. Make sure you got something for your finish. So gear check, that should be what you're doing. If you're leaving from Boston, and you should account time to drop your bag off before you have to get on the buses in Boston Common, because it is a little bit of a walk from Boston Common. So just account for that, or give it to a family member who's going to meet you after the finish area, which is what I do every year. Very doable to meet people. So gear check. And then at the Village, at Athletes Village, they do typically have water and Gatorade. I have seen Morton have tables up too with gels, but I wouldn't rely on that. But they do have water and Gatorade. So if you're like, oh, she said to keep drinking, but I kind of forgot a drink and I don't want to take anything from like maybe my handheld that I have, or I want to fill my handheld, because I did drink from my handheld, you can do this at Athletes Village. There are water and Gatorade tables. There's also lactation tents if you are breastfeeding and you need to use a pump. I'm not sure what they have this year though. I know it's been hit or miss every year. And I think For All Mothers has been trying to set up set up a tent, but I'm not sure. It's unclear if they will transport your milk along the course. You might be using hand pumps. They might transport pumps, but I don't think they transport milk. But that's available at the village via tent. Um, so that's the pre. Okay. Now let's get to the aid stations on the course. So aid stations at Boston, they start at mile 2, and they are about every mile after that. There are 26 of them. At every single aid station, there is water. There is lemon lime Gatorade Endurance. They are on both sides of the course. So whether you're right-handed, left-handed, or you just like to have a little mix of both. And they're pretty long aid stations. You know, I've never had problems taking several cups from aid stations at Boston just because of how long they are. The volunteers are fantastic. And there's also bathrooms and medical at every aid station. So if you need a Band-Aid, if you need a medical product, or if you're having an issue, they do have medical at every mile. And bathrooms, which is really helpful to know. So that's what's at every aid station. They have Maurten gels, both caffeinated and non-caffeinated at aid stations at miles 11.8, 17, and 21.5. So 3 different opportunities to get gels. If you've never practiced with Maurten before, maybe don't rely on these. Again, we're going with like having practiced everything to a T so that this is not hard to figure out on race day. It just feels like something you do. I do recommend whatever race you're running, if you can practice with what's on course at least once or twice, it can be helpful because then you're going to know in a pinch, can I use this? Like if I drop my gels, I forget my gels. I had a client completely forget her handheld with several gels in it once. If something like that happens, or it's just hotter out than you thought it was going to be, it's nice to know, well, at least I know I can just use what's on course and have it not be like a huge guessing game. I also joke with people, Maurten gels are pretty expensive, so like stock up because they're giving them to you for free. It's not really for free. You paid like thousands of dollars probably to get to this race, but you know what I mean. And be wary. Caffeinated Maurten gels have 100 milligrams of caffeine in them. So if you have not practiced with that level of caffeine, know that that's a pretty high dose of caffeine. Not everyone responds super well to that. So just make sure you practice with these things. I typically carry all my gels, and then I do use Maurten for some of my fuel plan, not all. And I will plan to take a couple gels on course as like bonus extras if I need them. And I pretty much have used them every single time. So take it, but make sure you've practiced with it. Okay. So kind of like my tips now for fueling during. And again, if you're a client, we've come up with individualized information. But for a marathon, we need to be taking in at least 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour to get the full performance benefits. We need to have practiced that a bunch in training. There's research to support taking even up to 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour. I think at every Boston I've run, I've taken around 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and that's something I've worked up towards. Again, there's no way to simulate perfectly running 26.2 miles at your race effort, especially if you are going to race the marathon and try to run like as fast as you can. There's no way to simulate that in training because we're never going to run that far for that intensity in training. Otherwise, you'd be like, I got my PR in training. I don't need to do it on race day. So don't be surprised if you feel like you need more carbohydrates on race day per hour, because again, your body is burning through them. That's why we carb loaded. That's why we're flexible. And if we need more carbohydrates, we're just going to lean on the sources that we know and have tried and used successfully to maybe take our gels a little closer together or sip a little bit more sports drink, that type of thing. I've also done that all 3 times I've run it. Been like, dang, I think I got a gel PR at all of the Boston marathons too. I think the first race I took 7, and I think the second I took 9. Last year I might have taken 10. And again, I'm like a 319. I ran 319, 325, and 327 marathoner. So I take a lot more gels than even some of the 4.5 hour marathoners that I know who are finishing like an hour later than me. And that's just because it's something I've practiced and really been able to train my gut to tolerate. So nothing new on race day. Like we do want to have practice. This is my point. At my first marathon, which was a 4 hour, I don't remember. It was over 4 hour marathon. I think I took 2 gels. So I've come a long way. Um, so I really recommend knowing what your strategy is because you've practiced it during training. You've also practiced taking fuel at race pace in training. So that's comfortable-ish for you. It is much harder to take gels when you're running harder than it is when you're running easy or walking. So if you find yourself always kind of cheating and taking the gels on your walk breaks or on the easy miles of long run workouts, time to challenge yourself, friend, because unless you're planning to take walk breaks or run easy to take your gels on race day, that's just something you maybe want to consider. The next thing I'll say is your hydration strategy. So Boston doesn't allow vests, like hydration vests. I have seen some people get away with wearing a vest as long as it doesn't have like a bladder in it, and it has like the bottles, but I wouldn't rely on that because I would hate for you to think that's fine and then get it taken away. They do allow handhelds. They do allow belts, and they allow you to bring in whatever fluids into the start area. So I've always taken a handheld, like a 20 ouncer on my Boston marathons. It's always been part of my plan. I recommend to all my clients to carry some sort of hydration because you can always ditch it if you feel like you don't need it. It's a lot harder to make it appear out of thin air if you're like, oh shoot, I do need this. I do want this. There are aid stations every mile, which is fantastic. The first couple tend to be pretty crowded just because unless you're in corral one of your wave, it's pretty crowded. You're going to see what I mean if you've never run the race before. I mean, it's fitting 30,000 people into like small town roads of Massachusetts. Like you're not in Boston. You're in these little cute like hoity-toity towns outside of Boston. And Boston's a very old area, so the roads are small. So it gets crowded the first couple aid stations. So my strategy and what I tell a lot of my clients to do, because again, I've seen it be very successful, is to carry something at least for the first couple miles of the race, because then you don't have to navigate super crowded aid stations. I've seen people go down at aid stations, fall, hurt themselves, and that stinks. Like there's cobblestone involved. Like we don't want that. So even if you're carrying something just for the first few miles to get you through the first part of the race, because we want to be hydrating early and often, that can be super helpful. So that's something I recommend is do carry some sort of hydration on you. And you can also use the aid stations. You can use the aid stations to refill a bottle, to use the cups and the Gatorade Endurance that's there. My strategy has typically been carry the handheld until it's gone and then ditch it and use the aid stations for the rest of the race. I've never run like a super duper hot race. It's always been under 60 to like 65 degrees. When I've run Boston, but if it was over that, I would absolutely continue to carry my handheld and just refill it, at aid stations. Usually I've ditched it by mile 10, which actually feels really good. It just feels like a nice breakup to the race. I'm like, I'm lighter. I get to ditch this thing. I don't have to hold it anymore. And any gels that I've put in it, I've usually taken first. So, it's a $30 sacrifice, but typically by the end of a couple training cycles, that water bottle owes me absolutely nothing, and it is fine to get rid of it. That is something I'm willing to do. So again, lots of ways to use those things. When I talk to people about like caffeine, because I get asked a lot about caffeine. I have a whole podcast episode on caffeine. It's part of the supplement myth busting series. So if you scroll back, probably honestly to 2023, I think it was in that season, but caffeine typically peaks about an hour after you take it. And there's a lot of different doses of caffeine in sports nutrition products. Different people are going to react differently to different amounts of caffeine. it starts working as soon as you take it, but it peaks an hour later. So for the Boston course, because of where the hills are in Newton, I tend to recommend people are taking caffeine and caffeinated gels or products around like 10K to 13.1 mile mark, because this way it starts to kick in during and after the hills. And that's if you tolerate caffeine well. So that's something you may also want to experiment with. As a coach, I'll usually have my clients do like a race simulation run a couple times during their training, which means that they are trying to do some more hills towards the end of their run. Um, so all in all, these are my tips. I think the biggest mistakes people make are they don't carb load and they don't practice doing it properly and scaling it up as their training cycle progresses. People don't practice fueling for a late start race. So they're kind of guessing on race day. And we don't want to be guessing on race day, especially if Boston is like a huge, massive goal of yours, something that's pretty expensive for you to do. We don't want to be guessing on that. People underestimate the power of fueling and hydration, especially when it comes to the hills and how intense they can feel. The hills themselves are not that bad. I am someone who runs on hills constantly, though, so that's where I'm coming from when I'm saying that. It is where they are in the course that makes them challenging and soul sucking if you have not fueled properly. Again, I have run it 3 times. I have been able to finish very strong all 3 times, despite the hills. So if you fuel properly and you don't underestimate how much you need, the hills can be really helpful. I have found it helpful to take gels every like 20 minutes when I am running through that part of the course, because again, it kind of can really zap your energy and it's helpful to replete that. People also underestimate hydration. Weather is a big question mark for Boston. Is it going to snow sideways? Is it going to be really hot? Is it going to be perfect conditions? Are you going to have a headwind, a tailwind? All of it's on the table, especially in most recent years with it being on the warmer side. So really making sure you have your hydration strategy, especially sodium and fluids nailed down, and that you can translate that really well to race day using what's allowed and provided on the course. People also let the nerves win. They let the nerves zap them before they even start the race. Observe the energy around you. Do not absorb the energy around you. Try to follow the people, trust the process. If the like actual start line logistics are really making you nervous, I think after you do this race once or twice, you're like, okay, I just have to go through the motions in the morning and I will get on the start line, no problem. But I know my first time I was like, where am I going? What do I do? Am I going to be on time? I don't take public transportation. How do I do that? There's going to be runners and people willing to help you literally all around in the morning if you are staying anywhere near where the Boston Commons buses are leaving from. So again, try to maintain a Zen central nervous system to the best of your ability, because that's going to help your appetite and help you feel a little bit better too. Because again, when we're really nervous too, that zaps your glycogen stores. And we don't want that. We need those for the Newton Hills. So I hope this was helpful. If I missed anything or you have additional questions, you're always welcome to send me a DM on Instagram. If this was helpful, make sure you share it, tag me on social media. And I really appreciate any love you can give the pod. This free resource is incredibly fun for me, but also a lot of work for me to put out. So if you've been benefiting from the show and you love it, I would really appreciate a 5-star rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Share it with a friend. Maybe it'll improve their fueling journey too. And until next time, happy running and happy fueling.